Hi, this is Joe Shannon. I'm a lawyer, a husband, a father of 6 kids, and I also host a podcast called Opening Statement with Joe Shannon. Please consider listening to our podcast on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple, and any other folks that host podcasts. Just Google Joe Shannon and podcast, and you'll find it. I hope you enjoyed the show.
Okay.
So we're very pleased to talk with Jessica Lahey, the author of The Gift of Failure: How the Best Parents Learn to Let Go So Their Children Can Succeed. And a writer for The Atlantic, The Washington Post, New York Times, a bunch of other publications. And so I'm so thankful she took some time to spend some time on our podcast. So welcome, Jessica.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Sure. So I think before we started, I told you, I'm a father of 6 kids. I'm one of 10 kids.
Wow.
And so I really am looking for information here for myself. I'm selfish here. So I'm really excited for this interview. And, but one of the things that, in these crazy times that we're in right now, these are really heavy, important issues that we're thinking about. We're right now we're on the weekend of, cities throughout the country had riots and all sorts of things going on. It's a Monday morning. It's June 1st. So here we are starting June, and I'm trying to be optimistic. I'm trying to be positive, and that's who we interview. We interview people that have solutions rather than just, basically screaming at the night. So thanks so much for coming on. First of all, Jessica, tell me a little bit about your background. Where are you from? How did you get to where you are now?
So I grew up outside of Boston, went to University of Massachusetts, which was my state school, my backup school. And I had sort of decided to go somewhere else. And my dad one day said, it is a gorgeous day for a drive. Let's just go check it out. You didn't even go visit. It was your safety school. Let's just go visit. Fell completely in love, ended up going there. I had a fantastic education at University of Massachusetts, went out and worked for a while, and then found myself in a situation where I was working with the Duke Child Protection Team. They assess kids for evidence of physical and sexual abuse, for prosecution, for custody, for all kinds of things, and just was enthralled with this one prosecutor who came in from Durham County District Court. Her name was Marcia Morey. And I just met her and could not believe how cool her job was. And so I had also worked in pediatric neurology. I'd done I ended up doing some work with pediatric HIV research at Duke University. And I just started shadowing Marcia Morey at juvenile court and just fell in love with it. And so decided to go to law school and applied to the 2 law schools on my back doorstep. My husband was at Duke Med School, so that was Duke and University of North Carolina. And one look at the price tags for the 2, especially since I was in state, it made it a really easy choice. And UNC just stole my heart. Also, I just loved learning there. It was a fantastic experience for me. I was a little bit older than my classmates and married at that point, and I think having that perspective on the experience of law school, I think, is really valuable. I had other things going on than just law school, and that was really, I think, really good for me. I was also spending as much time in juvenile court as I could. And then, I knew that's what I was going to do with my life. And then during my second summer of law school, I decided to teach a class on law in a democratic society at the Duke Talent Identification Program. And I make this joke all the time, but it's 100% true. I came home after that first day of teaching, and Tim, my husband, took one look at me and he said, "Are you even going to finish law school?" It was like I was lit up from inside. And I was pregnant with my first kid, who's now in college at the time. And that's what happened. I finished law school, but I went straight into teaching, never looked back. I thought I'd be working in juvenile court, but the teaching, that was just it. And after I finished, I started teaching. I've taught all sorts of places. I've taught at public, private, sort of hoity-toity and less hoity-toity, and the past mostly middle school and high school, and wrote Gift of Failure while I was teaching middle school. And so the heart of that book really is in middle school. But I spent the last 6 years of my teaching career teaching in an inpatient drug and alcohol unit for adolescents. So I had gone to that rehab to speak, as I'm in recovery myself. In fact, next week I'll have 7 years of sobriety.
Congratulations.
And I went there to speak. Thank you. And I went there to talk to the kids. And I just sort of looked around for a second and I said, wait a minute. If they're here 24/7, someone has to be their teacher. They can't just be here and not be doing school. And it turns out the state of Vermont sort of oversees the education program that runs at the rehab. And so the kids who are in rehab there also have to go to school for a couple of hours a day. And I was their English and writing teacher, and I did that for 6 years. And it was probably the most fulfilling teaching, one of the most fulfilling teaching experiences I've ever had. So that led to my next book, which will be out next April, called The Addiction Inoculation. And that is about preventing substance abuse in kids. So it's been,
there we go. I knew this was going to be a good interview.
It's been a pretty cool ride, mainly because I've gotten to do so many cool things. I've worked all over the place. Right out of college, I worked at a mutual fund company, and that was valuable for various reasons. I've been a speechwriter for a U.S. governor. That was obviously valuable for many reasons. But the confluence of writing and teaching just was such a surprise to me. I have always been a writer and had written a book that didn't sell, and I was kind of devastated. And I was like, look, I don't know what to write about now. And my husband said, when you really light up is when you write about teaching, and that's when your voice is its strongest. And so maybe you should do that. And I said, well, no one wants to read about education. And I've been very happy to be wrong about that. I started writing I wrote my own blog about teaching, and then that got picked up another place. And then I just started gaining readers. And next thing I knew, after submitting a lot, I was writing for The Atlantic and had a column at the New York Times for 3 years called the Parent Teacher Conference, and have just had the most delightful writing career because I get to find things I'm interested in and research and write about them. I mean, it's the best job ever.
All right. So I like that background. So let's back up here. You're growing up outside of Boston or inside Boston?
Outside of Boston, just about sort of Metro West Boston, about 20 miles outside Boston.
And then how many kids in your family when you were growing up?
2. I have a little sister. My mom and dad are actually here with me doing a sort of socially distanced visit. They have masks on inside the house, and we're trying to spend as much time outside the house as possible. Yeah. And my husband, by the way, is an infectious disease doctor. He's head of medical ethics and an infectious disease physician and vaccine researcher at University of Vermont. So he's sort of off busy doing COVID stuff right now.
Wow. I tell you, it's really, you got an interesting life. So you're growing up. Tell me a little bit about your first job.
First job? My very first job growing up, I lived down the street from a place called White Oaks Farm, and it was a company in a house. It was these people's home, and they had a commercial bakery in their home, and they made these really special macaroons, not coconut macaroons, but these really special almond cookies called Saint Emilion macaroons. And it was a recipe that I've never seen. No one was allowed to see the recipe, from these nuns in the Saint Emilion region, I guess, of France. And my job was to take the cookies off of the paper that they bake them on by painting the back of the paper with a wet paintbrush, peeling the paper off, and then packaging them for sale locally and for shipping. And so I did that I think I was in like 6th grade when I started that. And then I moved up to the big leagues, which was working at the apple orchard up the street from my house, Dowse's Apple Orchard in Sherborn, Massachusetts. And and went from there. I've done a little bit of everything. Worked in an outdoor store, worked in a bike shop, all kinds of stuff like that. Your usual like teen, jobs.
Well, how important is that, you think, for kids to enter into that type of outdoor, outside of the family relationship early? How important is that for kids?
I think it's invaluable. The problem is these days, it's incredibly difficult. Well, number one, it's become more difficult for kids to get jobs from liability, that sort of side of it. But kids are so scheduled with sports and other activities after school and homework and stuff like that. It can be really difficult to find the time to get a job, but it's invaluable. I mean, from my perspective, my kids, the jobs that they have had have shaped them as people. One of my favorite. So my older son, who's now in college, he's a junior in college, and he worked he went to camp in the summer, and then he started working as like an aide, and then a counselor and all that sort of stuff. And I love the fact that his badge at camp. Ben, what did your badge say? What was your job title? His job title was professional role model. And that alone, I know, he worked at Coniston, which is in New Hampshire. And that alone right there was an incredible experience for him. And the things he had to do in order to maintain that job and get qualified, he ended up teaching archery and riflery. He made a mistake around scheduling his archery class and missed the first day accidentally. He got the scheduling wrong, but there were only so many places where that was happening. And so he was in big trouble. If he couldn't take that class, he couldn't have his summer job. And so he didn't tell me at the time that he screwed it up because he wanted to figure out how to fix it himself. And he ended up driving to Maine to like where the instructor would be teaching next and fixing it himself. And what was cool about that is when he came to me with the problem already solved, he was really proud of himself for that. And that was really cool. My younger kid works as a junior librarian at our local library. So he's, for him, it's been really great because he's had to learn how to interact with patrons of the library. He's had to learn all the usual stuff you'd have to learn at a library, but it's also just been good for him in terms of human interaction and talking with other people and figuring out, how to talk with other adults. I think that's the thing that often gets lost. The value of, working at a cash register and having to learn how to talk to people who are mad for a certain reason or need help with things, how to problem solve. I remember when I worked at a bike store, a customer came in who was deaf, and my sign language was pretty rough. I could finger spell and that was about it, but we worked it out. We wrote notes, I finger spelled some things, and that's really valuable. So I think it's
agree.
Valuable for kids.
Yeah. My first job. So I grew up in a small town called Yakima, Washington. I don't know if you've heard of Yakima, Washington.
Yep, absolutely do.
Agricultural area. So there was apple orchards like you had, but we grow the most hops in the world, which is, good or bad. And then a bunch of produce, et cetera. But my job was to be the paper boy. And so when I was in 8th grade, freshman year, I think I had it for 2 years. I had 150 papers, had to get up at 5 a.m, had to do that. And then the big thing was what you just talked about was I had to go door to door every month to collect the money. And so you find out who pays their bills, who doesn't. Who likes, who will avoid you, all these things.
Right.
And all these things that are kind of second nature to a lot of people that are around adults all the time. And then nowadays there is no such thing as a paper route because number one, a lot of people don't read the paper anymore. They just write it online. But it's like somebody's, an adult's job that uses a car and does it. But I'm trying to figure out, Jessica, if there's a way, like for example, in Chicago, I want kids to have the same experience I had with that type of job, and in every neighborhood in Chicago, not just the suburbs where every single one, that they can have a job where they have to have that type of interaction, because I think one of the main things in our society is that you got to have a participation level and an ownership and a hope in your future. Those three things that are very important. And, you know, give me some ideas. You know, I know that you're seeing kids kind of not in the middle of their journey, kind of the beginning of their journey, but they got there for a reason. Give me some ideas that we could have where the Jessica Laheys and the Joe Shannons of the world, you know, our type of upbringing could be, you know, in the inner city of Chicago or Boston or these types of places. And by the way, I read Common Ground. Did you read Common Ground about Boston? That's a great book. It's about the busing in Boston. It's a really good book called Common.
Oh, yes. Yeah. I do know that book. I haven't read it.
It's one of the best books I've ever read. I've never, you know, I've been in Boston a few times, but I've never really been to all the neighborhoods, but really good, you know, history of the thing. But give me some ideas about maybe how we can work on the beginning part. And so we don't have these, you know, as many problems as we do now.
Yeah. Well, one thing I want to bring up just as a preface to that discussion is that there is very specifically research about the value of kids being able to contribute to the family, whether that's from a financial perspective or from a labor perspective, that kids and the research I'm thinking of right now, one of the studies actually took place in retrospect during and after the Great Depression, where they looked at kids who were able to go out and add, you know, make a few pennies here and there, and able to contribute to the family, even if it's just in a very nominal way. Those kids suffer less emotional problems after the fact from, you know, difficult things their families go through, because there's that feeling of an added level of control and contribution. Much of what we as human beings, there's this experience called learned helplessness, where when we feel like we don't have much control and the things that we are going to try to do to change the world, which is a really apt conversation right now, that if we feel like we have no ability to change our environment and we, in response to long-term suffering, frustration, stress, our default is to curl up in a ball and go helpless. That is the way humans are built. But the way we counteract that is by giving back more control. This is research that came out of that Martin Seligman, sort of the father of positive psychology at University of Pennsylvania. He did a big meta study on the research around learned helplessness and found that the way to short circuit our natural response to feeling overwhelmed, that learned helplessness response, is to give control back. So when you have a kid who just sort of goes boneless and is like, oh, I can't do it, I'll never be able to do it, I don't know how to do it, that giving control back is sort of the antidote to that. And it's also the antidote to this feeling of not having any efficacy in the world. And self-efficacy is one of the most important building blocks for a competence and mental health and feeling like you are valued and valuable and efficacious in this world. And so one of the things we're seeing right now is that many people are seeing, okay, we can protest all we want, and police behavior or the way that African Americans are treated in this country is not changing. So no matter what I do, I can't make things change. That means that you then have this low level of self-efficacy, and that's really damaging to people over the long term. Whereas, you know, if you're in a position of privilege and you want to change how something works in the world, we can go out and change things. So I think the problem is that when you're talking about, you know, people like you or me going out into the world and having a job, there's a difference between you in Chicago going door to door and asking for money and a Black kid going door to door and asking for money. The way that the two of you are going to be treated is very different. And so I think recognizing that and understanding that is going to be one of the first things we're going to have to do in order to talk about this. But you know, there are lots of things to talk about in terms of how we give people that sort of experience and re-normalizing the kids having jobs, kids having and it's difficult because the rules, it was funny when my younger kid was trying to get a job and he wasn't yet 16, he went to go get a job at our local hardware store. The rules, even when you're under 18, the rules about what he was allowed to do were so bonkers because they were guided by, rules around child labor and rules around liability. So like he wasn't allowed to, quote, run machinery. If you're younger than I think 18 in Vermont, you're not allowed to run machinery. And that can include a vacuum cleaner. And they were just laughing about it at the hardware store. They're like, we would love to hire you, but we can't hire you in a capacity that makes any sense for us to hire you because you can't even run the vacuum cleaner. Whereas when I was working, in probably non-OSHA approved, shed with no, freezing to death in the winter selling apples and, helping run the cider press, which by the way, was probably ridiculously dangerous. There are a lot of reasons. And what's fun about, looking at this kind of research and as it applies to education, like what we can get away with in education in terms of like taking away rules and letting kids get more physical and letting kids sort of have more person-to-person contact. A lot of the best research comes out of Australia and New Zealand where you can't sue schools. They are sort of blanket liability protection against schools. But in the US, if we let kids jostle about in recess, we can sue the schools if our kid breaks their arm, that kind of thing. So the problem is, I think we're in a terrible situation where between, the liability and the fact that kids, it just isn't a lot of work that younger kids can do. I've seen some kids do some really cool, ingenious, creating their own job situation. A kid that lives here in Vermont, a kid of a friend of mine, they have some maple trees on their property. So he started tapping their maple trees and he found a way to carbonate it and he sells it at the local farmer's market. He also bought what's it called? A cotton candy maker so that he can make it out of the maple products that he was boiling down himself.
Wow.
Kids can do things like, get some rudimentary products. We were watching YouTube and there was this guy who details cars and we were noticing that most of the equipment that he uses actually is pretty affordable. So it would, a kid could go ahead and decide that they were going to, set up put out their shingle as a car detailer in a small town like the one I live in now. Cars get filthy because most of our roads are dirt. So, what if you set up, hung up your shingle as a car detailer? I think there are ways to make it happen, but then we also run up against the overscheduled kids situation where
that's a huge suburban thing right. Yeah, I've lived that. Trust me, I've lived it, been there, done that.
Right.
The travel sports and all the time, and the
expectation is that kids are academics. They have to be athletic. They have to do athletics. They have to play an instrument. Then they have to go home and do homework. And all of that. Parents ask me all the time, "You're telling me my kid needs to be off of all digital devices X number of hours before they go to sleep because it's bad for their sleep. But how are we supposed to do that?" And I say, in return, I say, well, we got to take up a little ownership of that ourselves as parents. If our kids are out every night until 8 with all their lessons and they're traveling this, that, and the other thing, and they can't possibly get started till 8 or 9, then that's our responsibility as parents. And that's why I love, my editor at the New York Times, KJ Dell'Antonia, she wrote a piece called "I Refuse to Be Busy" about just not scheduling things for her kids. I happen to have a kid who's incredibly self-directed with the things that both kids actually, that when they latch onto something they love, they do it on their own, and they're not big joiners. So I don't schedule a lot of stuff for my kids. And so my kid can get a job after school being a junior librarian, but a lot of parents are worried what that's going to look like on their college. Oh, they have to have all these activities. Otherwise they're just not going to get into college.
The craziness of, so I'll give you an anecdote here, Jessica, and it really hit home with me. So our air conditioning went out on last Monday. It was a holiday and it was 90 some degrees in Chicago. It was crazy. And And so my wife's like, figure this out, and so I'm like trying to figure out fuses and all, and I'm calling people, everybody's like, anyway, so I finally called 6 different HVAC guys, and I finally got one that says, listen, I can come, we'll send somebody out there, but it's going to cost you, blah, blah. I said, I don't care what, just send somebody. Okay. My wife's not happy. We were, and the kids, whatever. So the guy comes out, and the next day, and it's like Elvis has entered the building because it was so hot in our house. And so he ends up, this guy's like 46 years old. He comes in, and I follow him around, and I'm just watching him, and he does his thing for a couple hours. He was had a white collar training, but then when he was in his early 40s, decided that his job was being eliminated or whatever. So he went back to HVAC school, got a trade, and now he's making more money than he ever did. Okay? Yeah. And he's got more control. People love him. They see him coming like Elvis or whatever. And so he got a lot of job satisfaction of it. It seems to me that our country has become so enamored in the college, white collar type thing that we forgot our roots of that we create things, we fix things, we invent things. And those people, in my book, are much more valuable in Vermont, in Illinois, in Boston. And so how do we, and I think one of the things I'm thinking about is that could be a great thing for a lot of our larger urban areas, is to get kids into that type of thing at an earlier age, all types of kids. I don't care what color they are, what culture they are. The ability to fix things gives you empowerment, gives you dignity, gives you something that is good. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, that is a multi-layered discussion, mainly because you have to look at the history of trade schools in this country. So trade schools right now are seeing a real renaissance. And there's an incredible documentary by American Radio Works called Ready to Work, Reviving Vocational Education. Highly recommend it. Love that. It's a radio documentary.
Say it one more time, Jessica, so people can get it.
It's called, it's American Radio Works, and it's called Ready to Work.
Okay.
Reviving Vocational Education. And it's a multi-part series. And most of it actually is centered on a Minuteman Vocational School, which is right near where I grew up in Massachusetts. But it's a really lovely documentary by American Radio Works. I just loved it. And, over the years, I've interviewed people like Adam Savage of Mythbusters, who's a huge advocate for trade work, for trade schools and the renaissance of trade schools. My own son, so where we lived in New Hampshire before we moved here to Vermont, we did not have a high school in our town. So our town's property taxes paid for the kids to go to one of a couple different high schools. And my older son chose St. Johnsbury Academy in St. Johnsbury, Vermont. And St. Johnsbury Academy is unique in that the founders of St. Johnsbury Academy decided that, or thought it was really important to have a trade program that was of equal stature as their academic programs. So St. J has an amazing plumbing, electrical, robotics before robotics was a trendy thing to have. They have these incredible trade programs, and it's not that unusual for the kids who are on the serious academic track to also take trade programs as well. And it's my older son took culinary, and then they run, there's a restaurant in town that's run by the school. But what you have to understand about trade schools is that their history is really interesting, in that trade schools were originally created to solve the immigrant problem, and I'm putting air quotes up, that for a certain period of time, there were a lot of people coming into this country at the turn of the century that we as a country weren't sure what to do with in terms of schooling. And so trade programs were seen as a convenient way to sort of shunt those people off into trade programs. It's actually, the tradition still lives on. I was in, not as much here in the US, but I was in Northern Ireland a couple of years ago, because they were rolling out Minecraft in the schools in Northern Ireland as an educational tool. And in Northern Ireland, at the age of 12, you take a test and they decide whether you are academically oriented or trade oriented. And
Right.
then those 12-year-olds get to be like 17 and you wonder why they're not motivated to do school. Well, it's because at 12 you were told that you're basically too dumb for school. So,
Yep.
you know, I'm a huge fan of trade schools. I'm a huge fan of, you know, I told my own kids, I said, if you really want to make some good summer money, go learn welding. But we also have to understand that there is a context behind trade schools that is a little bit loaded. But on the other hand, like I said, I'm a huge fan. I think it's really important for kids to know how to fix things. And I'm a pest when people come in my house and fix things, because I don't want to just let them do it. I want them to show me how to do it. And not everybody's excited about that. But
No.
I don't want to have kids who don't know how to fix things. That would be a huge disservice to them.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, a lot of, this whole thing with, letting kids fail, that's, the thing that you write about. I haven't read your book yet. I'm going to read it. I'm sorry I haven't read the book yet, but because I want to be, my oldest is 25 and my youngest is 11. So this is going to be for the 11 and the 15-year-olds. So I'll
I have a book for you, for them.
Oh, yeah, what do you got?
Book that just came out last week. So
Okay.
Gift of Failure will give you, in Gift of Failure, there's lists of what kids can do at various ages, both from a dexterity perspective and as a, cognitive perspective, blah, blah, blah. So lots of suggestions and stuff like that. But this book came out just last week. Catherine Newman wrote this book, How to Be a Person.
Okay.
And in this book, this is for your younger kid. So in this book, it's 65 different skills that your kid's going to need to know, like how to cook stuff, how to clean a toilet, how to deal with halfway dirty clothing, like clothes that don't necessarily need to go in the laundry, how to spend your money, how to load a dishwasher, how to write a thank you note. And it's really oriented towards younger kids, showing them very specifically how to do these things. And the nice thing is, like, here's how to set the table if the Queen of England is coming, or if this is just for a regular family night. But the nice thing is obviously teaching your kids how to do this stuff yourself takes a certain amount of patience. But what's really nice is when you have something to point to that says, here, sweetie, I'm cooking right now, but why don't you figure this out on your own? Or one of the things I did, there's a post at jessicalahey.com, and it's called Special Care Instructions. And there was a point at which my younger kid sort of said, it wasn't entirely true, that he didn't know how to do laundry, like I'd never taught him how to do it. And so I had heard from a friend that you can use dry erase markers to write on the outside of your washer and dryer, especially if it's enameled. So my washer and dryer had every instruction you could ever want written all over the outside of the machine, with like arrows pointing to things like, and big warnings like, stop. Are your underwear balled up inside of your jeans still? Do not press start until you undo that. Or are your socks still balled up? Or did you step in dog poop with that sock and you need to use that spray cleaner over there before you do it? So there are ways to make this stuff fun and help kids be more competent and capable of fixing things and doing things around the house, to do what I was talking about before, which is be of more utility in the home. And, paying kids for chores is one of the most important things that we need to stop doing. Paying kids for chores, and stop using the word chores, household duties is the correct term, at least in our house, because chores, I don't know about you, but I don't want to do something called a chore. It just sounds terrible. But the reason that we do things around the house is not because we're going to get paid for them, but because it's what we do as part of a family to keep the family going. And especially right now, when there are maybe more people in the house, I don't know about you, but we're doing more laundry and running the dishwasher more than we ever have before. And it's a real opportunity to say, I can't be the only person doing this, or my husband and I can't be the only people doing this. We all have to pitch in together, because this is a time when we really need each other. And that's what gives kids a feeling of, oh, I am a part of this family, not just in name, but in actual purpose. And that's great for kids.
What's the name of that author, that How to Be a Person book? We're going to give him or her props.
Catherine Newman. She's a lovely writer. She writes an advice column for Real Simple. She's wonderful.
Where's she out of?
How to be a She's out of Amherst, Massachusetts, actually. She teaches, she's been a teacher there for a long time in the creative writing program at Amherst College. She writes for Real Simple. She's written a bunch of other books that are just wonderful. She's great.
That's good. So,
yeah, I'm thrilled about this book.
Good. So one of the things that I always like to ask folks is, I know that you mentioned that prosecuting attorney or state's attorney that you mm-hmm. instantly kind of, so
she's now a judge, actually. She's Judge Maury now. Yes.
Okay. So
I keep in touch with her.
So, all of us have people that I think show us that mm-hmm. we can make a difference in not just one person's life, but many people's lives. And so Judge Maury is one of those. Is there anybody else out there walking the planet or has passed away that basically sat you down and said, Jessica, you can either be this or you could be this. It's your choice. What do you think?
Yeah. There are a couple. So I was really lucky during law school to be the first law Albert Schweitzer Fellow in the state of North Carolina. My husband had been an Albert Schweitzer Fellow for medicine and helped run some vaccination clinics in rural North Carolina. But I was the first one for law because I was helping run a program called Teen Court. And the Albert Schweitzer quote, whenever anyone asks me what quote means the most to me, I always say Albert Schweitzer's, what he said was, I decided to make my life my argument. And that's always been a really important quote for me, because I can say all I want, but if I'm not making my life my argument, I'm not living that reality. Judge Maury, there was a moment also with her when I was moving around. Generally, we stayed in juvenile court, but she had other duties. And so we headed up to district court, and there was a line of prisoners in their jumpsuits and their orange jumpsuits, all shackled together. And one of them, I didn't understand what was happening because I hadn't seen this before, but she understood that one of them was going through heroin withdrawal and was essentially just really sick in court. And this is something that happens a lot, but she went and spoke to the one of the attorneys or bailiff. I can't remember who she spoke to, but she's like, look, this person is suffering. Can we get them some help? And it was that moment where I realized, oh, she's really busy, but she's really looking carefully at the people around her and caring about them. And it would be really easy in her job to get calloused, and she just didn't. And then the third one is my mentor in law school, who became the dean of University of North Carolina School of Law, Dean Jack Boger. He's now retired. But he actually argued, he was my constitutional law professor and my education law professor. And he had argued in front of the Supreme Court on a case about the fact that the death penalty, he's anti-death penalty. And he argued a case in the Supreme Court about the fact that the death penalty was applied unfairly to disproportionately to people of color. They looked at some statistics about, who ends up getting the death penalty, if they kill a white person, if they kill a black person, if it's a black person killing another black person, and they realized that it was being unfairly applied and therefore was in violation of cruel and unusual punishment. And so he argued in front of the Supreme Court, and he came to my class when I was teaching 12 and 13-year-olds about what the Eighth Amendment is all about. And he talked about what it was like to argue in the Supreme Court. And he put the kids right there and talked about, how close the justices are to you. It's not in this big space that you would think. So he really was inspiring to me, and he was inspiring to my students. And so, yeah, I guess Albert Schweitzer, definitely Marcia Maury and Jack Boger are three people that I really have been huge inspirations to me. And they're teachers that, two teachers in particular of mine from high school that helped me see that I could be a writer. But those three people really have been instrumental, I think, in my trajectory.
And those are some pretty cool ones. I think back, when I was a little kid, and I think, your parents, when they sit down and they talk to you. So my dad just passed away, but my mom was a stay-at-home mom. And the one thing that I really hits home with my mom is she taught me how to think big. You know, think way bigger than your little provincial self, and think that you could do things. And that I think if that is buried, you know, if that is ingrained in a kid over and over and over again, then you have that steadiness of you know, that parenting that is constantly there, constantly relied upon, then you don't have to worry about a lot of the things that a lot of kids that don't have that type of thing, which that's the brutal part I see in society. And it doesn't matter whether it's city, suburb, or whatever, is I was so blessed to have two like really ordinary people that were my biggest cheerleaders and just constantly were there. And so I see that in some of your work, you talk about that the schools have had to undertake the role of being a parent sometimes, which they're not equipped to do that. But they have to do the best they can. My daughter's a high school English teacher, and she was a grade school teacher for 3 years, and now she's a high school teacher. And she taught grade school kids while she was going through her training in South Bend, and she told me all of these stories about some of these kids that the basics just were not there when they showed up to school. And that's, you know, understanding that each kid is an individual, each specific person is so special and important. When you talk about that judge figuring that out, I think that's so important that when we run into people, you know, we don't do it in my view, we don't run into people not on purpose. I think it's everything that's on purpose. We run into people and whether they're going to be a plus for them or a minus to them. And that's important. I think that we teach our kids, don't you?
Yeah, it's interesting when I get interviewed about gift of failure stuff. Often people ask me, you know, what my parents were like, because they figure it, you know, will give some insight. And the thing I always say is that the thing that was special about my parents is that they trusted me. They trusted me to make good decisions. The expectation is that I would make good decisions, and so I did. And I think, you know, I remember watching my peers, and, you know, especially now, watching the parents of my own children. I've never read my children's emails. I've never read my children's texts. I've never gone on the portal to look at their grades. I don't monitor my children's location on their phones. That's just not. I try to explain to parents that, you know, when we were young, if a kid called us at home on the telephone, it would be the equivalent of picking up the line in the guest room and listening in, because that's how, you know, texting and emailing, mostly texting is how kids, you know, really communicate. And so to intrude on that privacy means that you are taking away from their autonomy, you're taking away from their relationships, and there's all kinds of things that can happen for that. And, you know, I can only think that if my parents were raising me now, I try to act in a way that I believe they would have, which was to trust me, to let me have that space for my own communication, and to instead have lots of conversations about, you know, their friends and their grades and what's going on at school and stuff like that, instead of going and behind their back to look at those things. And, you know, I talk to kids I get to speak. I have the most fun job ever. I get to travel around the country, at least until recently, go to schools, talk to the teachers in the afternoon, talk to the kids during the day, talk to the parents in the evening, and the kids tell me the most amazing things. I talked to a kid recently who was 17 who said the reason he knows that his parents track him on his phone all the time is that they criticize the routes that he takes driving when he gets home. So he knows that they've been watching where he goes. I had a kid who was at a very religious school who emailed me afterwards because she was gay and she was scared to death. And she knows that the rules at this school is if you're gay, you can't come anymore. And her mother was reading her emails. And so she forbade me to have any communication with her daughter. And it was just, there's all of this undermining of trust that seems to happen. And I don't think people can go out in the world and feel like they have efficacy and feel like they have competence if there isn't this position of trust from the beginning. So for me, yes, there's this think big, dream big, you know,
Yeah.
have all these ideas about what you could do. But from the very beginning, it starts with, I bet you can figure that out on your own, or call if you need help, but I bet you can figure this problem out on your own. And that basis really, for me, led me to be a problem solver. It also helped that my dad was a designer and was a big sort of problem solver with mechanical things. And my mom was this person who just sort of could just kind of figure anything out. And so watching them both sort of go from the position of, I bet you I can probably figure that out on my own. And we didn't have Google, they didn't have Google, and they just sort of went out into the world and explored and adventured and figured out problems as they came. And those were the role models I had. And I think it's incredibly important for my kids to see me not call someone the minute the washing machine breaks, but try to figure it out myself first.
Sure.
That's the sort of parent I hope to be, and I hope that they grow up and say, you know, my parents, I think, trusted me to be a competent and honest and capable person on my own. I hope that's what they say about me someday.
Yeah, I agree with you that you know, that kids, you know, let's just put it right out there. So I don't believe that my upbringing back in the 60s and 70s is anything close to what's happening now because of the social media. The social media, if they would have had social media when I was a kid, I think it could have completely changed the trajectory of where I was at, because so my mother and father were very tired by the time that I was given the key.
Where were you in the sequence?
I was number 9. Okay.
Oh, wow.
I'm number 9. And so my parents gave me the keys to the car, the family car, when I turned 16, and said, you have fun or whatever. And no curfews. No, I mean, listen, I made a lot. I mean, I read this, I was laughing at this gift of fail. I failed a lot. I mean, a ton. I made a lot of really poor choices. But with social media now, in some ways I can kind of see, and I feel the increased sensitivity of our kids because everything is on film. Yeah. And can you imagine? I mean, listen, Jessica, you and I think about when we were in a high school and college, and everything that we did, all the mistakes we made are on film forever.
Believe me, I spend a lot of time talking about that when I'm out visiting schools too, and I'm looking for my favorite book on that topic, which is around here somewhere, but it's a book by a woman named Devorah, Devorah, Heitner, Heitner, Screenwise. That book is absolutely fantastic. There's also
Screenwise. I'll look at that one.
Screenwise is fantastic. The other one I really like a lot is this one, Raising a Screen Smart Kid, Embrace the Good, the Bad, and Avoid the Bad in the Digital Age by Juliana Miner. There are a couple of good books. There's one that I also really like that takes the perspective of being really optimistic about technology. And that one is called The New Childhood by Jordan Shapiro. He wrote for Forbes for a long time, and he's actually a professor at Temple. There are ways to have balance. There's a woman named Anna Homayun who runs this Green Ivy education consulting service. And one of the big things she does is teaches kids very specifically about how to handle their on-screen lives, especially as it relates to school. So I think
that's a big one. Tell you, so this is the cottage industry. If you're looking for commercial, is figuring out a way that you can erase all of these horrible things that kids like I did from the internet. I mean, and I don't know where that comes from, because when I talk to folks, my kids, I said, listen, that's online forever. There's businesses that keep stuff online forever, and it's so I mean, talk about pressure that you're addressing with the kids and the parents and the teachers, because it's almost like it's a scarlet letter that lasts forever.
And I think my kids grew up, so I've been writing publicly since my kids were my oldest was in middle school. And so we talk a lot about what I do and don't post about, privacy issues. I've made some pretty big mistakes in the public eye, and that's been challenging. I mean, I've had the angry mob with the pitchforks come at me on social media for things that I've said. And so my kids, we talk all of that stuff through, and, what optics, look like for kids these days. And it's really, really challenging. And it's something that I think giving them a baseline understanding of how all of this works right now, at least, I think to some degree, we can't really fully understand how this is going to be 10 years from now, but at least how it works right now. And then helping them understand that they have a responsibility to create that image of themselves that is going to be out there for forever.
You will never be out of a job, Jessica Lahey. And I really, this has been a really fun talk. And I'm hopeful that people will listen to what you have to say and read your blogs and pick out what's helpful for them, and what's not, just ignore it. But to me, listen, I want people to believe, a lot of what I say or write. Mm-hmm. I mean, I write a lot too, but I know if they just pick the positive stuff and mm-hmm. we do that, we can get along and do these types of things. So to me, it looks like you're doing just a great amount of work to help out kids and parents and teachers, and especially when you're helping with the folks that are already in the juvenile system and navigate their way out of that. But if there's a way we can figure out that they're never in that system, that's the kind of thing that maybe we can just one person at a time figure that one out. And if you have any more ideas, just write me a note. I want to help out.
The nice thing is that with the new book, with the addiction inoculation, it turns out that the things that help prevent substance abuse in kids help prevent a lot of other things in kids. We're talking about early intervention for academic failure and for early, child aggression towards other kids, and for a lot of other things that cause problems down the line, health-wise, and cause problems, from the perspective of like social emotional learning. These are also the things that help prevent substance abuse. And substance abuse really has to do more with either the self-medicating of issues that they're feeling that aren't being dealt with, and problems that we just can predict earlier on. Our research now on what does prevent substance abuse in kids has gotten much better over the years. So the nice thing is, if we do some of the things that help kids be healthy and happy and do well in school and stay engaged in school, those will go a long way to preventing problems later on in life. So
oh, great. Fascinating. I can't wait to see the book.
I'm eternally optimistic.
Good.
I'm eternally optimistic.
I'm bullish. I am absolutely bullish. So like I said, I'm one of 10 kids, and I came from a pretty low income area, and then have basically lived, a very blessed life, and it's time to pass it on, and to hopefully my kids will do that too. But just it starts locally, obviously, and the things we can mm-hmm. do in our own little neighborhood, our own family, then our neighborhood, and work our way out. And you're doing a great job getting it out to the masses. I really appreciate it. But thank you so much for your time. I really, I'm going to read the books, and I will give you my feedback. And
yeah, please do. Absolutely. Yeah. I would love to know what you think. And honestly, I think that one of the most important books that we can all read right now is called Mindset by Carol Dweck.
Read it.
Excellent. And in terms of learning, it's Make It Stick is another really great one. But right now, honestly, my reading right now is sort of centered on understanding, my role as, a person who has a platform and can use my platform and privilege to be of help to other people that are suffering right now. So actually my current reading is a book called How to Be an Anti-Racist. And I'm just moving forward from that position, and hope that we can help all kids, not just the kids that are sort of easiest for us to help right now.
Yeah, one of my major role models, and I always look at this, is Mother Teresa of Calcutta. Mm-hmm. And when I think of her, I have a picture of her on my wall. For a young woman from Albania to make her way to India, and then to Calcutta, and help out people that weren't like her, weren't her faith, weren't anything. And she just figured out a way, one person at a time, to help out. And the number one thing that I always liked about her was her humility.
What's that?
Her humility. She led with your humility. And I think with all of us in very powerful positions, like you and I are in the top, 1% of economic. So we, listen, we're there. It's up to us. I mean, if you think of Mother Teresa, she came from like very poor country, Albania, and went to the poorest of the poor in Calcutta. For her to make that difference, this little 4'9" woman, and to begin on the international stage, think of what folks where we're at, what we can do with all the economic engine that we have behind us. Mm-hmm. And it's like,
and if we do what Dr. Albert Schweitzer said, and make our lives our argument, I think that will go a very long way.
I agree with you. So we got some good role models. We got some work to do. So now I'm getting psyched up, Jessica. You got me psyched up today. I'm going to try and do more, but I'm trying to keep up with you. So, hey, thank you so much for appearing on this. We'll get this out as soon as we can. And I just really appreciated the time talking to you.
If you go, you're so welcome. And if you go to jessicalahey.com, under speaking, there's a little button that says download speaking bibliography. And it's essentially my favorite books on a range of topics, include from education, parenting, all that sort of stuff. And all the books I've talked about are on that list.
All right. So go to jessicalahey.com, folks, and then figure out what's good. And it's awesome. So I really enjoyed all the on-screen stuff that you had too. That stuff is, to me, the whole deal here with all this social media and how to deal with it. So you will never, ever be out of work, Jessica. You are going to be the busiest to busy the next. So good luck to you and safe travels.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
All right. Take care now.
Thank you for listening to the opening statement with Joe Shannon. You can find us on the internet at shannonlawgroup.com or telephone our office at 312-578-9501. Have a terrific day.